Valis 3 is the second game to be brought over to the US from the PC Engine CD, and one of the strongest video games to be released in 1990. From the moment you start the game, you are greeted with high-quality anime cutscenes, and it continues into a first level on rooftops with glowing highlights, parallax scrolling, and some great platforming. As the game progresses, the levels get even more distinct, and like its predecessor, move away from the standard water level, fire level, etc. Now that's not to say you won't see elemental-based levels, but they are presented in a more subtle way. For those following along with the plot, with Rogalus defeated, Yuko returns to her regular life as an inner-city schoolgirl. Ramses, king of the spirit world, has decided to round up his army and invade the dream world where Yuko is. Anyone in the spirit world who opposes him dies. A young spirit warrior, Char, heads to Earth to seek Yuko's Valis sword and ends up teaming up with Yuko. Along the path to fight Ramses, the pair will also meet Valna, or Vernal if you trust the manual, a spirit world sorcerer to assist them as well. These two new fighters remain relevant as you can swap between Yuko, Char, and eventually Valna at will. This seems to borrow a mechanic I first noticed in Castlevania 3, but it's possible my mind is only inserting the connection. The aesthetics are without a doubt high quality and necessitate the Super CD upgrade, but this works at odds with the middle ground gameplay. Your controls on a 2-button controller are better suited for at least 3 buttons, but the team at Telenet does its best to make it work. A good example of this is the dodge roll, which allows the player to traverse a wide open gap and remain invincible while they do. It even does damage, which is quite useful in later levels and in boss fights. Unfortunately, this dodge roll is performed by pressing down and run, which is the PC Engine's version of the start button. Having such an important move mapped to a button that was never intended to be used as such can be a detriment, especially when in the heat of battle. The same is true of the magic attacks, which are achieved by pressing up and button 2. In the first 2 levels, it doesn't seem to matter at all because the enemies are mostly in the same place. Later on, when you need to fight enemies on the ground and in the air, you can find yourself unleashing magic when you intended to slash on the ground and then jump again. This is because all of the attacks have a slight delay to them, which is present in both the console and emulated version of this game. You adjust to it after the first 10 minutes or so, but if you aren't playing the game in one sitting, or you are using save states, it can be a disadvantage. You may want to use save states because this game is brutally difficult, and as opposed to Valis 2, the challenge seems to be more with the levels than with the bosses. I did my best, and sunk a few hours into trying to master the game on my PC Engine CD console. At first, things were going well and I was having a blast getting to know the quirks and learning the game design. The previously mentioned quality of the game kept me going, and I could swear the third level was straight out of Contra, but again, that may all be in my head. Then I got to level 4. Level 4 is very difficult to begin with, but about 2/3 of the way through the level, you are met with easily the game's greatest challenge. It's a traversal over wide gaps you can't naturally leap, and in order to get across you have to freeze enemies with Char's Ice Blast and use them as platforms. Unfortunately, all of the other enemies can knock you back and result in instant death. Every time you lose your lives, a continue screen knocks you back to the beginning of the level. This is as far as I was able to get on console, but I tried for a good hour, assuring myself it was doable provided I was just good enough at the game. This is true, but I had no idea just how much you would have to play this level to get through it. After more than 150 attempts, I finally made it to the final boss battle of the area. The sequence you see here may look easy enough, but it took me hours of emulation and loading save states to precise moments before I was able to complete it. Even then, the boss battle had me held up for a bit of time as well, which would have meant repeating the whole sequence if I wasn't in emulation. When I was a kid, it would have been my summer challenge, and it would have been fantastic to conquer, because I know it can be done with practice. Instead, I had to feel good that I finally beat it despite the fact that I was cheating my way through. This is the most egregious example of how you progress in a game that can be stifled to a crawl, but it's not the only one. Valis 3 is one hard game, but it's also one that can be incredibly rewarding. It reminds me of what we call Nintendo hard, but just taken one step further. I can't discredit the game for a high challenge, especially when you consider how little the library of the Turbografx CD was in the US. but that may make it hard on people who want to casually check it out. Still, I had a blast with Valis 3, and although I wasn't able to beat it on console or with emulation, I enjoyed my time and look forward to giving it another unemulated go in the future. There's a reason Valis fans thought so much of these games, and I do feel that Telenet found close enough to that desired balance. It must have been popular too, because yet another sequel would release the following year, although the English port was unfortunately cancelled. Valis 3 is one of the few PC Engine CD games that is playing by the same rules as its cartridge counterparts and making a strong case for the value of the CD platform. And yes, I am aware of the Sega Genesis/Mega Drive port that came out in 1991 by Renovation. Technically, it's a very similar game with some slight tweaks to the levels, and the boss fights are much better conflicts, but there are also distinct changes. As expected, you can now perform the dodge roll by pressing down and A, and use up and A to swap characters, removing the need for the run button. Unfortunately, the trade-off is that the graphics come off a bit fuzzier than the PC Engine CD version, and the soundtrack has definitely taken a drastic hit. Enemies seem to have more hit points, come in more abundance, and the dodge roll no longer makes you invincible. Dare I say it, but it's possible the Genesis version is actually harder and, in my opinion, less balanced. Not only that, but several levels were stripped from this version or merged into others, so it's a modified experience. We will see this in the future with other ports, and I am still of the opinion that these games are better left untouched. I don't see how that's possible here, especially considering it's a huge CD title crammed into a relatively small version that fits on a cart, but that only further backs my point. So while you can get the Genesis version much cheaper, it may be of interest to play the definitive version. Oh, and it's also on the Japanese PSN for less than $10, so it may be worth checking out the original.